Elara Snowdon sat on the porch of her cabin in the remote reaches of British Columbia, a solitary guard of her own empty days. She had retired from the Canadian Park Service 5 years earlier, when a rock slide in the mountain park had permanently stolen her full ability to walk, and with it, the meaning of her life. The persistent ache in her leg was merely an echo of a deeper, invisible pain, the loss of the only career she had ever loved. At 52, with prematurely silvered temples, she had sought refuge in this wilderness, where the only constant companion was the roar of the Fraser River. One May morning in 2018, a telephone call shattered her carefully constructed silence. It was Caitlin from the nearby Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Her voice, usually calm, was strained. "Elara, we have an emergency. We found a gray wolf pup, about 6 weeks old. He's alone. A logger brought him in, found him near a logging cut. He's unusual, too docile. We can't house him long-term here, and his behavior makes him unsuitable for release. We need a foster, someone who understands wolves but can stick to a minimal contact protocol, just until we can secure a permanent sanctuary placement." Elara paused. Wolves were a different league. She respected their wild, fierce independence, but had never worked closely with one. "Minimal contact, Caitlin. You know what that means for a wolf. The goal must always be the wild, if there's any chance." "I know, Elara," Caitlin replied quietly, "but he has no chance. He can't be released. He seeks contact. You are the only person we have who can provide the intensive care he needs right now, while strictly avoiding imprinting. Just a few weeks, please. Get him strong." The plea in Caitlin's voice, combined with the image of a tiny, orphaned predator, chipped away at Elara's resolve. "All right, I'll come get him." The drive to the center was filled with a mix of apprehension and a familiar, though painful, flicker of purpose. Elara reminded herself of the protocols: protective gloves, neutral voice, avoiding direct eye contact, to prevent any suggestion of a bond. At the center, Caitlin led her to a quiet, controlled room. In a straw-filled carrier, a small, tufted-eared creature lay curled into a tight ball. "We named him Zephyr because of his almost weightless coat," Caitlin whispered. As Caitlin gently lifted the pup for a quick health check, Elara saw his eyes properly for the first time. They weren't the fierce yellow slits of a wild hunter, but a warm, almost amber hue, wide and utterly unguarded. They locked onto Elara's, and for a breathtaking moment, the world seemed to fall away. There was no fear in that gaze, no feral suspicion, just a deep, seeking absence of wolfish wariness that resonated strangely within Elara's own lonely soul. He's something else," Elara murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The first few days were a blur: bottle feeding specialized formula, monitoring his temperature, and willing the little creature to live. Zephyr was weak, often listless, but he never refused food. Elara adhered strictly to the non-imprinting protocols, but Zephyr seemed to defy these efforts. During feedings, he would often stop suckling for a moment, his amber eyes fixing on Elara's face, not with a wild animal's assessment, but with something that felt disconcertingly like recognition. One evening, about a week into Zephyr's stay, Elara was exhausted, She was carefully lowering him back into his warm box when the pup did something entirely unexpected. Instead of just settling, Zephyr, with surprising strength for his small size, pulled himself up and leaned his muzzle against Elara's hand. He didn't nip, he didn't lick, he simply rested there, and a soft, vibrating purr-like rumble passed through Elara's glove. This wasn't in the manual. This wasn't wild behavior. It was an offering of trust. A tiny, fragile wolf connection. Her heart, so long guarded, was constricted with an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It was a rush of warmth, of connection, so potent it brought tears to her eyes. She gently stroked his soft fur. The professional detachment shattered into a million pieces. "Oh, Zephyr," she whispered, her voice thick. "What am I going to do with you?" From that day on, their relationship transformed. While Elara still intended to prepare Zephyr for transfer to a large sanctuary, the emotional wall had crumbled. Zephyr, it turned out, was an exceptionally affectionate creature. Every time Elara handled him, the pup would press himself against her, often gently pushing his muzzle against her neck or shoulder. It was a quiet, tender offering. The weeks turned into a month. Zephyr was thriving. His coat was sleek, his eyes bright, his movements agile and playful. But the more time Elara spent with him, the more she realized he was different. There was a profound gentleness to him, a lack of the typical wolf aloofness and aggression she had witnessed in the wild. The time came for the difficult conversation with Caitlin. "He's doing remarkably well, Elara," Caitlin said over the phone. "We've been talking to a couple of sanctuaries, but they're very selective. Given his unusual docility, he's difficult to place." Elara took a deep breath. "Caitlin, I don't think Zephyr is a candidate for any external placement, and I don't think I can give him up." There was a long pause. "Elara, are you sure? This is a wolf. You know the permits, the complexities. The goal was always non-imprinting. I know, but Zephyr, he's not like other wolves. He doesn't just tolerate me. He seeks comfort. He leans into me, a full-body press, when I'm near. It's a connection that defies instinct." Elara knew how insane it sounded. Caitlin, who had witnessed many strange animal behaviors, was intrigued. "He leans? A full-body nuzzle?" "Yes, it's his way of connecting." "All right, Elara. If you're serious, we can start looking into the legalities. It will be a mountain of paperwork. You'll need specific federal licenses, and the enclosure requirements for a permanent resident wolf are far beyond what you have now. Are you prepared for that commitment, for his entire life?" "Yes," Elara said, without a shred of doubt. Zephyr had become more than a foster. He was a lifeline. In caring for the wolf, Elara had found a piece of her own broken spirit beginning to mend. The next few months were a bureaucratic whirlwind. Elara navigated the labyrinth of provincial and federal regulations, applied for exotic animal permits, and consulted with specialized veterinarians. She hired local contractors to help her build a massive, secure outdoor enclosure attached to her property, complete with a naturalistic den, climbing mounds, and a running stream feature. It cost a significant portion of her savings, but she didn't hesitate. During this period of uncertainty, Zephyr was her constant, calming presence. When Elara felt overwhelmed, she would sit by the mesh, and Zephyr would approach, gently pressing his muzzle against the wire, his quiet purr-like rumble seeming to absorb her anxiety. Finally, the day came when the last permit was approved. Custody of Zephyr the Grey Wolf was officially granted to Elara. A wave of profound relief washed over her. Zephyr, sensing her emotion, trotted over and gently pushed his head under Elara's hand, then leaned his warm, furry body against the mesh. A silent, comforting presence. "We did it, boy," Elara whispered, burying her face against the soft fur. "You're home." Life with Zephyr settled into a new rhythm. He was not a pet. He was a wild animal with specific needs and instincts. Elara respected this, providing an environment that was as close to natural as possible, within the confines of safety and legality. Zephyr spent his days exploring his spacious enclosure, pouncing on blown leaves, napping in sunbeams, and watching the surrounding forest with those unnervingly wise amber eyes. But the leaning and gentle nuzzling continued, and it wasn't just for Elara. Her closest friend Silas, a grizzled local trapper who had known her for decades, was initially skeptical. "Elara, you've gone soft in your old age." When Silas first visited after Zephyr was settled, he stood at a nervous distance. Elara was inside the enclosure, giving Zephyr fresh water. The wolf, after a curious glance at Silas through the reinforced mesh, ambled toward Elara. He stood patiently, then gently pressed his head into her hip, and let out a soft, sustained rumble. Elara simply smiled and stroked his powerful neck. Silas's jaw dropped. "Did that wolf just lean on you like a dog?" "He does that. That's Zephyr." Over time, Zephyr grew accustomed to Silas's visits. One afternoon, Elara and Silas were sitting on a bench just outside the enclosure. Zephyr, who had been resting, woke up and sauntered over to the mesh closest to Silas. He rubbed his cheek against the wire, his deep purr audible. "Go on, see," Elara encouraged gently. "He's just saying hello." Hesitantly, Silas reached out a gloved hand toward the mesh. Zephyr didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the touch, allowing Silas to scratch the rough fur just behind his ears. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Zephyr leaned his entire shoulder against the wire, mimicking the full-body press he gave Elara, right where Silas's hand had been. It wasn't a threat. It was a soft, sustained connection. Silas pulled his hand back, his eyes wide and misty. "By the stars, Elara, he's extraordinary." Zephyr's unique gentleness began to spread locally. Elara was careful, never exploiting him, but she occasionally allowed supervised interactions for trusted friends or local children dealing with trauma, always with Zephyr's comfort as the priority. One such visitor was young Maya, whose family had recently lost their home in a fire. Maya was withdrawn and refused to speak. Elara brought her to the enclosure. Zephyr, in turn, seemed instantly intrigued by the silent child. He came to the fence line, sat down, and watched her with his calm amber eyes. Elara, seeing the girl's stillness, invited her closer. "This is Zephyr, Maya. He listens very well." Zephyr mirrored her stillness. Then he did something Elara had rarely seen him do with a new person so quickly. He lay down near the mesh, exposing his white chest, and let out a quiet chuff. A friendly, soft greeting. He then reached out his muzzle, extending it slowly through a wider gap in the mesh, not toward Maya, but resting it gently on the ground between them, as if an offering of peace. Maya slowly reached out her small hand and placed it near Zephyr's muzzle. Zephyr didn't move, just let his warmth radiate. After a few moments, Zephyr drew his head back, and replicating his signature gesture, he pressed his forehead lightly against the mesh where Maya stood. It wasn't a full lean, but the intent was unmistakable. Maya gasped, a small joyous sound. "He likes me," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken in weeks. Elara watched as a small measure of healing, facilitated by a creature who communicated in the silent language of gentle touch, returned to the girl's face. Years passed. Zephyr grew into a magnificent adult wolf, powerful and commanding, yet retaining that extraordinary gentleness. He became a quiet legend in their corner of British Columbia. People Elara met would often ask, "Are you the ranger lady with the leaning wolf?" Elara, now in her late 50s, found her days filled with a profound sense of peace. The sharp edges of her own career-ending trauma had softened, replaced by a gentle warmth that Zephyr had somehow helped rekindle. He was more than a rescued animal. He was a companion, a confidant, a furry four-legged therapist, who communicated not with words, but with the profound eloquence of a gentle touch, a comforting presence, and a soulful lean. One cool evening, Elara sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset cast long shadows over Zephyr's enclosure. Zephyr himself was nestled on his favorite mound, the picture of contentment. "You know," Elara said softly, her voice filled with emotion, "when I first went to that rescue center, I was determined to keep my distance, to not get attached. I thought my heart had closed up for good after the accident." She paused, then continued. "But Zephyr, he had other plans. He didn't just capture my heart. He reminded me it could still open, still feel. He showed me that even in the wildest of creatures, there can be an immense capacity for gentleness, for connection." As if on cue, stretched and ambled over to the side of the enclosure closest to the porch. He sat, watching Elara with that familiar, loving gaze. Then he stood on his hind legs, placed his paws on the wire, and gently pressed his large forehead against the mesh right in front of her. Elara knew that their time together, like all precious things, was finite, but for now, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the wilderness and the unwavering affection of a wolf who offered a silent lean instead of a howl, Elara found her own wild, wounded soul truly and finally healed.